New anti-DPRK propaganda dropped. The Walk Free Foundation, which is a human rights organization, released their latest 2023 Global Slavery Index, and it put the DPRK above Eritrea as the worst modern offender. Here's an Al Jazeera article about it. Modern slavery most common in North Korea, Eritrea, report says. Rights group Walk Free says up to 50 million people worldwide were experiencing forced labor or forced marriage in 2021. Interestingly enough, I actually sourced Walk Free in my video about slave labor in Canada. Now, is it hypocritical for me to source them in one of my videos and debunk them in another? No, because Walk Free's reporting on Canada is based on actual evidence, tangible, provable evidence. Their reporting on the DPRK, not so much. We're going to dive into the sources they use for both the DPRK in this video and the People's Republic of China in the next video and see if it contains any shred of academic rigor. Spoiler alert, it does not. From the Al Jazeera article, by this benchmark, reclusive and authoritarian North Korea has the highest prevalence of modern slavery, 104.6 per 1,000 population, according to the report. Reclusive? Sure, yeah, the DPRK is definitely reclusive. Authoritarian? Absolutely not. See, authoritarian is a meaningless buzzword used by the West to propagandize about any country that doesn't follow the strict capitalist model. Other similar words used in this manner are totalitarian and autocratic. These terms would apply to any capitalist country just as they would apply to any actually existing socialist country, like the DPRK or the PRC. Every country on Earth has strict authority. Freedom doesn't exist anywhere in the world, and it probably shouldn't. The nonsensical tactics that the West uses to try to discredit countries like the DPRK and the PRC are not scary enough on their own, so they invent new terms to make them sound scarier. The DPRK is a democratic nation. It may surprise some of you to hear that, but it's true. I would argue they are far more democratic than any capitalist country with very stringent worker protections. They don't practice modern slavery. The West, and especially the CIA, wants you to think they do, though. The fact that the DPRK is quote-unquote reclusive means the US can make up anything they want about them, and it makes it very hard to prove, or even in some cases, to disprove. They'll cite anonymous sources in the country, and for some reason, Western liberals will eat it up. They'll pay or coerce defectors to make up ridiculous lies about the DPRK, and even when they are proven to be false or the statements are retracted, no one will care. To get an idea of what life is actually like in the DPRK, watch the documentary My Brothers and Sisters in the North. It's free here on YouTube. Another free documentary on YouTube you can watch is Loyal Citizens of Pyongyang in Seoul. That gives an in-depth look into the defector industry and how South Korea and the US gets the information they want out of North Korean defectors. Aside from Al Jazeera's intro paragraph, that little snippet I just mentioned is the only time in this article that the DPRK is mentioned. Yet they're featured prominently in the headline. Now, why is that? Well, because DPRK news gets clicks, especially when it's negative. Al Jazeera and Walk Free both know this very well. That's why they frame it in this way. Anyways, let's dig into the Walk Free report. 2023 Global Slavery Index, Walk Free. They have a fancy little splash page for the report, but you have to actually dig into it a bit to find the meat of it in PDF form. We'll get to that in a bit. The report makes an extremely dubious claim of almost 2.7 million DPRK residents being slaves. That's a little bit over 10% of the population. They also claim that the DPRK has the worst government response to slavery. It's somehow in the negatives, at negative 2.6, while every other country, including Eritrea, is a positive number. That seemingly implies that the government furthers slavery? We'll find out. Interestingly, the US is reported to have over 1 million people in modern slavery, which is over a third of what Walk Free, once again dubiously, claims about the DPRK. But of course, the US has over 10 times the population of the DPRK. The splash page for this report doesn't say much about the DPRK, oddly enough. You have to dig into a different web page for each category, like forced and child marriage, state-imposed labor, etc. But we'll just hit up the full report link at the bottom of the page instead of clamoring around this website. It's a 172-page report. I hit Control F and found 78 mentions of North Korea. This is the first one with some substance to it. In North Korea, 1 in 10 people are in modern slavery, with the vast majority being forced to work by the state. This is a conservative estimate in a country that the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights found engages in widespread and systematic abuses such as torture, wrongful imprisonment, and forced labor against its citizens. This is a conservative estimate? Excuse me? There's a footnote that sources this claim. It links to a 2014 UN Human Rights Council report of the Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Here's the methodology of that report. Methods of work. Owing to its lack of access to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the Commission obtained first-hand testimony through public hearings that were transparent, observed due process, and protected victims and witnesses. More than 80 witnesses and experts testified publicly and provided information of great specificity, detail, and relevance in ways that often required a significant degree of courage. So it's defector testimony. That's it. It's either spoken or written testimony from defectors. That's what they're basing their claims on. At the bottom of this UN report, it says, video recordings and transcripts from all the public hearings are available on the website of the Commission of Inquiry. The website goes to a 404 page, but I found it through the Wayback Machine. I clicked on the very first public hearing. The main speaker in that hearing was Mr. Shin Dong-hyuk. Interestingly enough, the Guardian article that I briefly showed earlier in this video talks specifically about Mr. Shin. About a year or so after this hearing, Shin recanted most of his story. The DPRK released a video of his father saying that he was never born in these camps and that he was lying, and out of shame, Shin recanted it. Not before a best-selling novel was released about it, though. Don't worry, I bought this used at a thrift store. I didn't give these scumsuckers any of my money. But don't worry, the propagandist author who transcribed Shin's story said that he is working with his publisher to gather more information and amend the book. That was 8 years ago. Maybe he'll get to it someday? I bought this book because I wanted to go through the citations in the back and highlight all of the ones that link directly or indirectly to the US government. It lights up like a Christmas tree. According to the timestamp of his testimony, Shin lied to the UN Commission for nearly 2 hours. So, to sum it up, the UN based their report on testimony from a known liar, and Walk Free still presented that evidence, quote unquote, as fact. From this, I think we know where the rest of this Walk Free report is going to take us. Nowhere fun. Just into sad, pathetic, Red Scare territory. There are also reports of North Korean women being lured or coerced into leaving the country to be sold as brides in China. Women who escape from those situations and return to North Korea often face punishment by the authorities rather than receiving support as victims of bride trafficking. This comes immediately after that last bit in the Walk Free report. The footnote goes to a report in the Journal of Trafficking. This report seems to also rely exclusively on defector testimony. Interestingly, though, it's mostly about North Korean defectors being trafficked in China. I did find this little blurb in the report, though. She also received threats to her life, and with being reported to the Chinese authorities, which would have led to her being deported back to North Korea to face serious punishment for defection, including torture, imprisonment, sexual violence, forced labor, and even death. Yoon, 2021. Despite being based entirely on testimony and not tangible evidence, this report makes quite a bold claim. The footnote for this claim links to a Human Rights Watch article. Here's an excerpt from it. Concerns among relatives spiked last week when Chinese authorities forcibly returned nearly 50 North Korean refugees who now face torture, imprisonment, sexual violence, and forced labor. Human Rights Watch's source for this article is the CIA-operated Radio Free Asia. As with all Radio Free Asia articles, the source is anonymous, totally real people. China has repatriated about 50 North Korean escapees, including Air Force pilots and others who could face severe punishment, including the death penalty. Sources on the Chinese side of the border told RFA. The first such repatriations since Beijing and Pyongyang closed their borders in January 2020 at the start of the pandemic took place on July 14th at the northwestern border city of Sinuiju, across the Yalu River border from China's Dandong, a source in the city told RFA. These anonymous fake people are only used as proof that China was sending defectors back to North Korea. The claims of torture or violence or whatever is further down in this Radio Free Asia article. A U.S. Department of State spokesperson told Radio Free Asia that Washington was deeply concerned about the North Korean asylum seeker situation. North Koreans who are forcibly repatriated are commonly subjected to torture, arbitrary detention, summary execution, forced abortion, and other forms of sexual violence. We are particularly concerned by recent reports that nearly 50 North Koreans were forcibly repatriated, the spokesperson said. They don't even name this U.S. government stooge. Even that source is anonymous. Like they couldn't find a U.S. government worker who would be willing to reveal their identity? Does this one exist? But once again, Walk Free has sourced another report based on defector testimony, and to back up their claims, they cited a U.S. government worker from a CIA-operated propaganda rag. Yikes. I skipped around a bit more trying to find all the references to North Korea in this Walk Free report. This one stood out. While noting a lack of recent and available data in some countries such as China and North Korea, the U.S. has the world's largest rate of imprisonment, therefore the risk of state-imposed forced labor is particularly concerning. This is about the U.S.'s use of prison slave labor. The evidence for this is outstanding and remarkable. It's tangible evidence. It's pure data. Yet Walk Free still tries to poke at China and North Korea, claiming that since they don't have access to the country, they may have more prisoners than the U.S. For some jurisdictions assessed by the World Prison Brief, data is not available for certain categories of prisoner, for example, those detained prior to trial or sentencing in China. No data is available for Eritrea, North Korea, or Somalia. Did you catch that self-report, though? You say you can't know for sure how many prisoners there are in North Korea, yet you'll make the claim that they have the highest prevalence of modern slavery in the entire world. You're just making it up. Folks, that's called confirmation bias. Having 25% of the world's prison population, despite only having 4% of the world's total population, and a constitutional amendment that allows slavery for prisoners, the U.S. doesn't even crack the top 100 worst offenders in this report. From that alone, we can easily reach a conclusion about the veracity of this reporting. But we'll continue on anyways. Pages 52 and 53 of the Walk Free report are dedicated entirely to state-imposed forced labor in the DPRK. This should be good. North Korea's ostensibly socialist system is upheld by widespread state-imposed forced labor of citizens. There's 4 different sources in this footnote. The first is to one of Walk Free's own reports, which we'll get to in a bit. The second is to another UN Human Rights Council report. This one is from 2021. This report cites the 2014 report that we already know is based on disproven and retracted defector testimony, and this newer report is also, of course, based solely off of defector testimony. It doesn't even come to a firm conclusion anyways. Conclusions. Analysis of available information continues to confirm that there are reasonable grounds to believe that crimes against humanity have been committed and may be ongoing in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Reasonable grounds to believe is code for some people were paid or coerced to tell us this. The third link in that walk-free footnote goes to another Human Rights Watch report titled North Korea Events of 2020. This is a fun one. I've done a breakdown of this report before. The COVID-19 section, which is relevant considering this report is from 2020 and COVID took center stage in 2020, cites Radio Free Asia 3 times and the Daily NK 4 times. Obviously, Radio Free Asia is operated by the CIA, but the Daily NK is funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. The NED is administered by U.S. Congress and exists to spread propaganda about America's geopolitical enemies. The Daily NK also uses almost exclusively anonymous sources, just like Radio Free Asia. And that's just the COVID-19 section. That's just one portion of the report that cites CIA-operated or funded media 7 times. The claim that Walk Free is trying to prove with this report, though, isn't about COVID-19. It's about state-imposed forced labor. The forced labor section of the Human Rights Watch report links to 2 other Human Rights Watch reports. Both of them link to that 2014 UN report, which, I kind of feel like a broken record here, but it's based on disproven, retracted defector testimony. This is a common thing that I find when I do breakdowns of these anti-DPRK or anti-PRC sources. They just kind of link back and forth to each other never-endingly. This is because there aren't really any tangible evidence for any of their claims, so they latch onto one, admittedly flawed report from the UN and just link to it incessantly. The fourth and final link in that walk-free footnote goes to the aforementioned walk-free report, which we will now take a look at. It's titled Pervasive, Punitive, and Predetermined: Understanding Modern Slavery in North Korea. This study sheds light on the hidden reality that is forced labor and other forms of modern slavery inside the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, better known as North Korea. As it is not possible to directly survey or otherwise perform data collection within North Korea, the research findings are based on interviews with 50 defectors from North Korea who are living in South Korea. Yeah, it's more defector testimony. The important thing about this, though, is that they specifically mention that these defectors live in South Korea. This is important, and you'll understand why if you've watched the Loyal Citizens of Pyongyang in Seoul documentary that I mentioned at the start of this video. In it, a lawyer who works with defectors in South Korea explains the process that these defectors go through when they enter South Korea. South Korea's National Intelligence Service, or NIS, which was modeled after the US CIA, it literally used to be called the KCIA, imprisons these defectors for weeks. They brutally interrogate them daily. After being browbeaten enough, the defectors typically give them the information that they want, which is basically North Korea bad. The NIS agents will ask leading questions like, "Oh, another defector told us that blah 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 happened in North Korea. Is this true?" The defectors need to stick with this story once they're released from the NIS. South Korea refuses to issue them passports. They're not allowed to freely leave. South Korea keeps them as slaves. Ironic. Taking a look at the footnotes for this walk-free report, we see the typical US government-funded nonsense. They source the hidden gulag from the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea several times. The HRNK is headed by Carl Gershman, the president of the National Endowment for Democracy, CIA agent James R. Lilly, who worked in Laos to undermine communist insurgency and helped to insert a number of CIA agents into China, and also a smattering of US presidential aides. That's very unbiased. The Hidden Gulag Report also features testimony from admitted liar Shin Dong-hyuk as well. Oh, and this walk-free report directly cites the US Department of State. Alright, well that's one footnote from this 2-page spread on the DPRK in that original walk-free report. The next 5 all cite that same DPRK-specific walk-free report. Another 4 footnotes from this section also cite the same report, and 2 others cite that 2021 UN report. So once again, all of these citations source the same defector testimony. They have no tangible evidence, and they use US State Department propaganda to back up their insane claims. What I was confused about, and what I couldn't easily find a source for in this walk-free report, is the source of the claim that there are specifically 2,696,000 North Korean slaves. It's an estimate, but why is it so exact? Why not 27 million, for instance? The report says many times that approximately 1 in 10 North Koreans are slaves, but it lists the population of North Korea as 25,779,000. Exactly 10% of that would be 2,577,900. So where did this almost 27 million number come from, and why is it so specific? And which came first? Was it the estimated prevalence of modern slavery at 104.6 out of 1,000, or the estimated number of people, which is almost 2.7 million? If that number came from the estimated prevalence, well, where did they get the 104.6 per 1,000 stat from? To find out, I had to check the methodology section of this report. The estimates of forced labor in the private economy, excluding the sex industry, and forced marriage are derived from 68 nationally representative surveys on forced labor and forced marriage jointly conducted by ILO, the International Labor Organization, and Walk Free, and implemented through the Gallup World Poll. During the 2017 to 2021 period, a total of 77,914 respondents aged 15 years and over were interviewed either face-to-face or by telephone across the 68 survey countries. In the 5-year reference period for the estimates, while surveys were conducted in 68 countries, men, women, and children were reported to have been exploited in 129 countries, says see Figure 2. If we look at Figure 2, it clearly shows that North Korea was not surveyed, but South Korea was. These numbers are based on household surveys. They cold call people and ask them questions about slavery. They only surveyed 68 countries, so for information on the other countries in this report, they would have asked about people's relatives who live in those other countries, for instance. So they probably asked South Koreans about North Korea. Well, that's a problem because South Koreans have been brainwashed by anti-DPRK propaganda basically since the Korean War. They watch defectors tell more and more spectacular lies on TV shows like Now on My Way to Meet You. Once again, watch Loyal Citizens of Pyongyang and Seoul to understand what that show does and why it's very problematic. South Koreans will absolutely tell wild tales like, oh yeah, my friend lives in North Korea and they saw all kinds of slavery up there, I promise. That's where this number comes from. They use a convoluted equation to determine an estimated prevalence of slavery in all of the countries in this report, based solely on these household surveys. Anyways, is that good enough? Can we dismiss the DPRK parts of this report as pure ideological propaganda based on zero tangible evidence? Personally, I think so. Western liberals probably won't. But anyways, subscribe to this channel to get notified for when part 2 of this video is posted, where we break down the parts of this report that are about the People's Republic of China. Spoiler alert, it's also complete nonsense.